This is not a commercial for The Way I Heard It with Mike Rowe, the award-winning podcast now entering its 10th year and available wherever podcasts are listened to. No, this is a commercial for Mike Rowe's foundation, which has just set aside $10 million to help train the next generation of skilled workers. That money is available right now at microworks.org. It's waiting for anyone who wants to learn a skill that doesn't require a 4-year degree. Electricians, plumbers, linemen, welders, shipbuilders, HVAC techs. America is desperate for men and women with skills they don't teach in universities. And the MicroWorks Foundation is committed to helping train America's workforce for hundreds of thousands of AI-proof six-figure jobs just waiting to be filled. Apply today for a work ethic scholarship at microworks.org or support our efforts with a donation of any size. We're closing America's skills gap one job at a time, and we could use your help at microworks.org, MIKEROWE works.org.
Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Gabert, the scientist turned mindset and high-performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. My guest today is Dr. David Preston, an American educator, journalist, and consultant. He's the founder of Open Source Learning and the author of Academy of One. For more than 30 years, Dr. Preston has helped students, leaders, and organizations strengthen their learning fitness and build high-performing learning communities. His clients and students have achieved extraordinary goals and realized their dreams by transforming the art of learning in today's world. And as a lifelong learner, I am eager to learn more. So welcome, David, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Claudia.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this. So, David, the way I see it, the art of learning is potentially the most important skill we can master. But I'm curious, what inspired you personally to focus your life's work on this specific skill?
You asked the best question, but this is going to be a long answer to a short question.
Okay, go for it.
So I've loved learning my whole life. There is nothing like the feeling of solving a puzzle or a problem, or remembering that thought that was on the tip of your tongue. But I've also had a love-hate relationship with school my whole life. And that's sort of ironic because I went to a lot of school. I finished my bachelor's, my master's, my PhD in a joint program of education and management at UCLA. And then I taught for 11 years at UCLA. And a friend of mine was starting a nonprofit that helped middle school and high school students in America learn about the ecological environment around them by actually going out and stewarding their natural resources. And he brought me along to a meeting with the Los Angeles Unified School District, massive organization. And I got to bantering with one of the administrators who said, "Oh, you academics, you're so adorable. You have no idea what happens anymore on the days we don't give tours." Now, at that point, besides teaching at UCLA, I was also the principal of a management consulting firm based in Los Angeles that focused on the human elements of organizational development and behavior. So we would do things like team building or conflict management or leadership coaching, all of the stuff that inevitably, once you get past the processes and the computing and the finances and the law, ultimately business is about people and people are about understanding. So I was already sort of in this mix, but when he said that to me, he said also, "So why don't you come teach?" And I thought, oh my gosh, how many reasons do you want me to give you? Why don't I want to come teach? I like my life. You read the papers, you don't have to go a long way to figure out that's not desirable for a lot of people. But my mom was a teacher. This was in the couple of years after 9/11, and a lot of my graduate students and my consulting clients, and these were the best and the brightest, really successful people, were privately confiding in me that they had to recover from their education just to survive in their lives, much less thrive in their professions or their creative endeavors. And, we have billions of dollars of self-help industry because we don't get an owner's manual for our brains. We don't learn a lot about our learning processes in our formal education. And I'll touch more on that later. But longest story short, I accepted. I think I was having some sort of embedded anthropology fantasy, like I was going to be Hunter S. Thompson or Jane Goodall and go inside the tribe and get the story and help figure it out for everyone. Well, that didn't quite happen. But what did happen was I was all set to be done. I was at a school which was one of the 5 largest schools by enrollment in the United States. So we had almost 6,000 students in what looked like general population at a minimum security prison. I mean, it was 12-foot barbed wire and Los Angeles Police Department. So it was all those movie horribles that you see and you go, oh, wow, it was that. And I had a lot of wonderful experiences, but there was one young man who walked into my class with a book, and that already got my attention because that never happened. But then the book itself wasn't a textbook. It was The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And I literally just dropped all pretense and said, where did you come from? And it turned out, this is where the story gets stranger than fiction. This young man had forged his parents' signatures on the applications and called them from the airport as he was boarding a plane in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, to come to California, which is how he wound up in a warehouse of a school as opposed to a brochure, Beverly Hills 90210 school. He learned enough English to pass his classes, graduate, and then he invited me home for dinner. And I'm pretty sure this is the unofficial long-distance world record for any teacher going to visit a kid at his home. But I wound up in Mongolia, Tibet, and Western China for a month with this young man and his family. Wow. And Claudia, some bells rang for me that I have not yet been able to unring about how we learn, how we interact in culture around learning, and what are the opportunities to navigate through obstacles. Because I had been consulting for entrepreneurs and executives in Fortune 500 companies, but to see things from that different a perspective shook me up in the best possible way. So when I came back to America, I called my consultants together and said, yeah, that sabbatical, it's going to take me longer than I thought. And I'm not giving you the business, but I am giving you your books of business, and I'll support you on the client work. But this is going to take me a while. And I moved to a different school in a different area where I knew I could get away with stuff. And I broke everything. I started using the public internet. I started creating international and intergenerational collaborations. I started thinking about mindfulness and memory and how we navigate our emotions. And that became the mental fitness of the framework that eventually grew into open source learning. And that's what I've been doing for the last 15, almost 20 years. When the pandemic happened, my learning communities were just fine. Everyone thrived. And there were some instances where we had to find safe spaces or we had to make sure that there was connectivity. But what I realized when everybody wanted to go back to normal was just how badly normal sucks for most people, especially in school. And so for me, this was a great opportunity to combine the evergreen work that I have done for decades in consulting, in business, with everything I've learned about individual capacities for learning and transforming social systems into high-performing learning networks. And so now I'm working with private companies, entrepreneurships, and schools, and ask a simple question, get a loaded answer.
It's so interesting. And thank you so much for sharing. I mean, you already touched on this. But I'd love to go deeper. So evolutionary speaking, learning is a survival skill, right? Yep. Now, can you break that down for us and explain the gap between this important skill and the current educational landscape? Because we all know, as you said, it sucks.
It does. And the reason it sucks, like anything that we say that about, right? I mean, we have this, the good news is we have energy for it. To say that something sucks means that I want it to be better because I think it could be better. And that's so true with learning environments. Learning is very different than being taught. Learning is active, it's engaged, it's personal, it's interdisciplinary. School is the only place in the world where we have to think in math for an hour and then beep, a buzzer or a bell tells us to stop doing that and start thinking in German or Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So when I thought about how, you mentioned evolution, and I worked at UCLA with an amazing scholar in evolution named Bill Schaff. And one of the things Dr. Schaff taught me when I was younger was that evolution doesn't work in these slow gradients like you see on the t-shirt where the man gradually stands up from being a monkey. What really happens is the water rises and you either grow fins and gills or you die. And so there's a great liberty in that. And what I mean by that is because I saw and heard your reaction, and yeah, that's scary. In fact, I'll just bring it into the room. We're living right now in a time of great disruption and upheaval, some of which is so frustratingly unnecessary, in my humble opinion. But when you think about the stress and trauma that people are dealing with now, it's very hard to empathize with a young person in 2025 because the levels of cortisol, the levels of distraction are of the sort that in the 1950s and 60s would have someone institutionalized and on lithium.
Yeah.
It's really, the sea change, the water is rising. So the question becomes, how do we grow gills and fins? And, there's a heavy temptation, especially for entrepreneurs. You read Fast Company or you see somebody's website or, there's an old joke in snowboarding. How long does it take a new snowboarder to become I got the joke all wrong. Let me start over. What's the difference between a new snowboarder and a snowboard instructor?
Tell me.
About 6 weeks.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And there are so many people on the internet that want to tell you how to be successful, but they haven't actually done this. They just know a few things about SEO and they're willing to share their expertise with you. We don't have to like everything that we do. In fact, positive psychology is wonderful, and it feels good to reframe things so that I can take on harder challenges. But our brains work in some very specific ways when it comes to tenacity and willpower. Tenacity is that sense of, I'm going to do this no matter what. Willpower is, I'm not going to do that no matter what. So tenacity, I'm going to finish the marathon. Willpower, I'm not going to eat the donut. There's a part of our brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And it's unique because for most of our behavior, if you watch somebody's responses on a functional MRI, whenever they lie or do most of what we do in the world, there are multiple parts of our brains that light up in interaction with one another. But when it comes to tenacity and willpower, it really seems to be this anterior mid-cingulate cortex region that matters. And it turns out that we can build that almost like a muscle.
Yeah.
So I don't know if have you ever done cold plunges?
Oh, yeah, kind of. Yes.
Right. Everybody's response. And it's a perfect example of, I don't want to do this. I know I'm good for it. I know it's good for me, and I know I'm gonna. So here I go. Now, you would think that hating on it would make it more difficult or less valuable or productive for you. It's exactly the opposite. Hating on it actually helps build your anterior mid-cingulate cortex.
It does.
So long way back around to your question. How do we create a learning environment that bridges that gap between where schools developed, which, from American curriculum and from the Prussian model that was brought over way back when, to our society and our economy and our culture and even our environment today? Well, one place to start is doing the hard things now will make things easier later in two ways. First, they'll actually get stuff done. But second of all, they'll make us more capable of getting that stuff or that kind of stuff done. And so we're surrounded by this thing that hardly anyone understands. The public internet in its current form is half a century old, and we've never had an awareness program, much less a school curriculum, designed to understand it. So we don't. And if the fish don't understand the water in which they're swimming, because the internet water influences everything from our economy to our dating decisions to what doesn't influence, Even if you're not on the internet, somebody near you is, and they're influencing you. Job one is to incorporate the technology of our age. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm huge on doing everything with computers, and I'm certainly not huge on doing everything with AI. I think that our AI, our authentic intelligence, is the place to start so that we can use our tools before our tools really start using us. Mental fitness, I mentioned, being our ability to focus, concentrate, remember, navigate our emotions. I also added in some elements that helped frame this out. Physical fitness, not just in terms of PE class, that's probably a horrible trauma for lots of people, but in addition to the right kinds of exercise and understanding how those can preserve quality into older years and stave off neurodegenerative diseases and do a whole lot of other wonderful things. It's also, I didn't learn how to eat until my 30s. I certainly didn't learn how to eat in school where everything was, dosed with additional sugar and all sorts of other things that hurt me. Rest. So mental fitness and physical fitness. Civic fitness. How do we steward our resources? How do we participate in social systems? How do we get along with people on airplanes? Have you noticed since the pandemic, people can't get along together in closed spaces? How do we mediate conflict and have restorative dialogue? So mental fitness, physical fitness, civic fitness, and there's two more. One is spiritual fitness. I do not mean religion, but it can include religion. I do mean feeling like a very small part of a very large universe. There's a research literature that has now been produced about awe and wonder and the effects it has on us. It is amazing. And if you're an entrepreneur trying to figure out how to galvanize your marketing department, that is a truly wonderful place to start. In addition to spiritual fitness, last but not least, is technological fitness. And here, it's important for us to remember, and I am a word geek. I was a word geek way long before I was a teacher. Technology comes from the ancient Greek techne. And techne doesn't mean tools. It certainly doesn't mean computers. It means cleverness in using tools. So when Odysseus landed on the island of the Cyclops, and the Cyclops said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Nobody." And then he stabbed the Cyclops in the eye, and the Cyclops is running around screaming, and the other Cyclops are all asking, "Hey, who hurt you? We'll get that guy. Who did this to you?" And he says, Nobody did this to me." The Greeks were like, "That's techne." So having a sense of purpose and cleverly using tools. Now, I went through all of that to answer your question this way. What do you want to learn? And now I'm asking you, Claudia, if you had all the time and money in the world, podcast was not, on your schedule, you could do whatever you wanted. What are you curious about? What's the itch that you would want to scratch? What do you want to learn about?
Oh my God, so many things. I just spent a week in Egypt, and I would love to be able to read the hieroglyphs. I would love to do that.
Oh, that's awesome. That is great. Now, your answer was, nothing up this sleeve, no way to predict what you were going to say. And that is one of the more spectacular answers I've gotten recently.
Awesome.
The thing is, first, I want to point out when you got that question, it was hard to answer quickly. Now, that happens for one of two reasons. For most people, you had a unique reason. You were like, "I'm in this all the time. I love learning, and I just have to figure out which item from the buffet I want to choose." I could see. But for a lot of people, it's a hard question to answer because their curiosity has already atrophied. When we're 5, 6 years old, if you have a nephew or a cousin somewhere, you know how it goes. It's 100 questions a day. And usually it's why. Anything you tell them to do, it's like, but why? But we're conditioned, and we have a very tortured relationship with curiosity, certainly in Western culture, but I would say at this point globally, because there's so much authoritarian control and social pressure that on the one hand, we have all these beautiful classroom posters that says, "Go in the direction of your dreams," and life is a daring adventure or nothing. But after you get past Thoreau and Helen Keller and you look around at what people are actually doing, it's, what is our mythology? Don't bite the apple from the tree of knowledge. Don't fly too close to the sun. Don't be the curious cat. So hieroglyphics. Every answer to that question, the only thing that I could have predicted ahead of time is what I'm about to say to you. Every answer to that question has an interdisciplinary opportunity attached. You could come at that question from world history. You could come at that question from linguistics. You could come at that question from symbology and storytelling. You could come at that question from mathematics, because after all, the pyramids have to be in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could literally wrap every single course that a school would require of a student at any age appropriate and stage appropriate level to matriculate, or in an entrepreneurship, from onboarding through advancement, or from stranger to prospect in the funnel. And the neat thing about this is, from there, after you check all the boxes that you were hoping to qualify, you can improvise and make it yours. And that becomes unique, because if you curate this in multiple media on the internet, you create instant value.
Mm-hmm.
Someone on the internet is currently telling your story. I can't think of a better person to do that job than you. And especially if you are an entrepreneur with either a personal brand or an emerging idea, commodity, product, or service that you want to turn into an entity. But even the fact that you are putting things out there in such a way that you can build community around them for critique, for support, for guidance. Mentors love to be asked. And you wouldn't know it from reading our political headlines, but we live in a really generous world where many smart, accomplished people want to help, want to see the next generation of entrepreneurs and learners do at least as well or better. So again, I'm giving you long answers to short questions, Claudia. Did that touch the bases?
Yes, I loved it. Thank you so much. Now, let's go to something you already mentioned, which is, you talked about the cognitive and maybe even emotional injuries that are sometimes caused by school. So can you go a little deeper on what those injuries are and how they might show up decades later in relationships, leadership, or entrepreneurship in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Memory is an interesting thing. And like most brain-related experiences, we can intuitively relate, right? This is why every stand-up comic who talks about personal moments that we didn't think anybody else saw has an audience, an appreciative audience. But at the same time, we tend to adopt a little bit of knowledge and then make a language out of that. So take, for example, the word trauma in today's world. People talk about that a lot without really attaching the significance and the weight that it deserves. There's a wonderful book. I think the title is "The Body Tells the Score."
Yeah.
And the idea that we carry these things with us, not just in our cognitive memory, not just in our affective experience, our emotional experience, but also in our mitochondria. Somewhere in our cells, these things change. And when I was young, I learned from a wonderful mentor named John Wooden. He was a very successful basketball coach. Americans might recognize him as the Hall of Fame UCLA coach who won, I think it was 10 championships. And when I talked with Coach, he very rarely talked about the sport. He talked about poetry, philosophy, and politics. And his favorite politician was Abraham Lincoln. And I bring that up because Abraham Lincoln, Coach's favorite quote of his was, I learned something from everyone I ever met. And most often it was what I didn't want to do. The scarring experiences of school can be valuable, but they also need to be addressed. Like everything else, we need to take stock. Every chef that's ever yelled at someone in a kitchen, you got to look at that and say, why? And we live in a different era now, but there was a time when that culture really supported that sort of behavior. That was seen to be like what chefs did. Well, there was a time when, a teacher would rap a student on the back or the hands, or yelling at a student was perfectly acceptable. I had a babysitter when I was a kid, and she didn't like what I did. She would say, David, you do that again, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you if you do that again. Well, in today's world, I hear you're gasping, and that's like, how could you possibly say something like that? Well, in the 70s, you could say something like that because it was absurd. Nobody would actually do it. So as I think through this with you out loud, I'm going to answer this in two ways. The first is personal, and the second is contextual or cultural. The personal work we all need to do is learning. If I had one umbrella term to describe whether it's acquiring new skills or concepts, whether it's what we call doing the work, whether it's going through therapy or losing weight or making those steps in your life that nobody ever taught you how to do, and now you got to go find it. That learning doesn't need to wait. I had a student in my class when I was teaching high school once who was there. Wasn't a problem, wasn't obnoxious, was nice enough every day. But you could see that even though his body was in the classroom seat, his mind was everywhere else. It just wasn't present. And so I finally asked him, like, what is it? What's going on? And he said, well, I want to learn to fly. I want to be a pilot. And there's absolutely nothing for me to do here. But wait. And I thought about it and I said, 100%. You are correct. And freedom, like learning, is not something that you can be given by an authority figure. You have to take it. So where are you going to find a pilot to teach you? And why are you waiting? And the light bulb went on. And this is a true story. In fact, this is the preface to my book, Academy of One. 3 months after that conversation, I was in the back seat of a Piper Tri-Pacer, small airplane, 3,000 feet above the campus where we had that conversation.
Wow.
And yes, I was, can I curse on your show? I was friggin' terrified. But those are the moments where, so why is that extraordinary? Well, it's in the root of the word extraordinary. It's extraordinary, because ordinary, as we said before, and I'll review for the listeners who missed that, sucks. Ordinary is turn to page 47 and read silently while I read aloud and try to act like you're awake, even though you don't give a shit. It is horrible. You don't need to be yelled at or physically abused or sexually abused to be traumatized. You can just be dead from the neck up because you've given up on your life or you've given up on yourself. How many people graduate school thinking that they're bad at math?
Yep.
I thought I was bad at math. I'm a perfect example of this one.
Same.
Really? What happened to you?
I just felt I was too stupid to get it. And also that's exactly what the teachers pretty much said. So I learned languages. So I learned multiple languages at school. And so therefore all the science teachers, they said, well, you're in the class with all the students who learn a lot of languages. So you don't have to care about math, or you're not good at it, and that's perfectly fine. And we're not even going to bother. So just, get through it.
Well, I wish that was unique. Thank you for my daily dose of irony, though, because the research tells us that when people learn arithmetic, those operations are not the same part of our brain as algebra. Algebra is a different semantic language. It's like learning a language. And I have the same experience as you. Now, when I was arithmetic, I killed it. When I got into algebra, it made sense to me. But then there was that whole domineering authoritarian thing of show your work. And so I got in trouble because why? I got the right answers, but I didn't show my work. So the assumption was that I was cheating. So this is a true story. I'm 13 years old. Kathy fought wherever she is. Screw her. Horrible woman. And by the way, we need to bring humanity back to the learning process. This whole mechanized thing where people act like robots, no wonder AI is taking a toehold in human communication. Because if you call customer service and they can't talk to you for real and they're just on a script, I don't care if AI takes that job. In fact, it'd be better because AI won't care if I curse at it. And the idea, for example, that teachers don't have favorites, Of course, I like some people better than others. That's silly. So anyway, back to this teacher I still can't stand. So she brings me in at lunch. I have to give up my lunch, come into her classroom, put all of my things down on the floor by the doorway, walk to the overhead projector in the front of the room. She gives me a pen or a pencil. She gives me a piece of paper. She unmasks the problems on the overhead projector. I do the problems again. I don't show my work. I get them right. And she again accuses me of cheating and fails me. So 30 years later, I'm going through my parents' garage. I'm trying to help them clean up as they move. And I find my test scores from around that period of time. And Claudia, I actually tested better in math than I did in English and language arts.
Wow.
And here I am, you see my bookcase, it's not filled with math books. But so back to the question about trauma, and not for nothing, but this also goes to entrepreneurship and work, because whenever we find ourselves in a place where, I honestly believe that people want to do well, and that means that they want to do the right thing and they want to do it successfully, whether or not anybody's looking, but certainly when they're being observed by someone whose approval they seek. And when I was in graduate school, I was recruited into a consulting firm. My first experience working with entrepreneurs and growing companies was working for this boutique $3-4 million firm. And we had some really good clients. I was working with Howard Schultz and the executive team at Starbucks, doing team building and thinking about decision-making processes and how people communicated. My boss was a tyrant. I loved the work, but the atmosphere was so toxic that I felt like I sucked at what I did.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me to process that, because I went from feeling like I was at the top of my game, I'm in my late 20s, I'm getting these opportunities, to really feeling low. And, this goes back to entrepreneurs who read about success stories. Failure is so underrated as a life gift and skill. You don't learn without mistakes, and you don't make mistakes without screwing up. But the ways in which we interact, and a lot of this now, I'm Gen X, and I think I have a luxury of growing up in an analog world and seeing the shift.
Yeah.
I think that every generation brings a unique insight. And I truly mean that. I'm not taking anything away from everybody, from the boomers to the greatest generation to Z and millennials and alpha, because that's what makes the soup tasty. That's what enriches all of our experiences, to empathize and to listen and to learn from one another, because otherwise you don't need anyone else in the room.
Yeah.
But processing how we did things, and going back to that Abraham Lincoln quote, is useful so that we can pay it forward more supportively, more collaboratively, because ultimately that's what being effective looks like. When your people are dedicating themselves with their full effort and they're feeling good about it, they're going to save you money automatically, because you're not going to have to replace them so quickly. They're going to do a better job. They're going to make less mistakes in the long run. And using open source learning as a tool and as a strategy, you can engage with them, because people being whole, for especially younger generations, and having life balance is really important. One of the things my early boss did to me was say, "Oh yeah, I understand you're going to finish your PhD at the same time, so we'll work with you and you'll have a balance." But in practice, it was not that at all. It was demand after demand after impossible demand, and I was working 20-hour days. So
Yeah, tough.
I think recognizing the experience for what it is without dramatizing it, without exaggerating it, is to learn from it. And, the processes can range from talking about it with a consultant like me, to therapy, to journaling, to just dedicating ourselves to be present and empathetic with the very next conversation we have. But that's a significant issue, because school has a lasting impact. And here's another thing. What if school isn't failing? what if school is functioning the way it's designed to? I mean, there's a more dangerous consideration here. And in America now, of course, the Department of Education is being defunded and everybody's being told to use AI and all of this madness. But what if the idea is just get people to become customers and widgets in a system that is not built for their benefit?
Ew. I don't like that at all.
Sorry, my next answer will cheer you up. I promise, whatever it is.
Okay, good to hear. Well, I really think that a lot of what goes wrong at school is that we don't look at failure the right way. As you said, it's one of the things that's essential for learning. And it's also one of the things that's really demonized in school or universities. And I see that all the time when we work with students. I mean, it matters so much whether you tell the student that they are stupid because they made a mistake, or if you say, well, you just maybe weren't focused, or it does not mean that you are stupid just because you made a mistake, right? So I think that is one of the things that traumatizes people for decades. And I think that's also something that I experience and I see it all the time. And I was also wondering, now that we're talking about this, how would you explain the difference between learning fitness and intelligence? Because that's something that people often lump together, but maybe they shouldn't.
Yeah. And it's interesting because so we use words as though they are captions to a reality we can count on. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the words themselves create our sense of what's real. Yeah. And so when people talk about intelligence, that's a wonderful place to start. You know, Alfred Binet in Paris in the early 1900s created the what later became known as the IQ test. He created that as a way to help young people and their families understand where they were not able to succeed in their formal education and how they could make up for these deficiencies. And he even went so far as to say, whatever else we do, please, let's not use this to measure someone's intelligence.
Well, that worked out well.
Yeah, because what happened was an American got a hold of it, Lewis Terman at Stanford, and made it basically the rate limiting factor for entrance into the military and studying groups of people. It had a lot of racist history in terms of admissions to organizations, whether it was the Northeastern universities or whether it was the military itself. And, you know, Galton eugenics style overgeneralities about this type of person with this type of a skull could think those type of thoughts, things that we now think of as absurd. But that was all done under the umbrella of intelligence. And then in the 20th century, Howard Gardner, the multiple intelligences, and there's, you know, ongoing questions about the bell curve. We still have residual thinking that follows this unfortunate train of thought. If any of your listeners are MBA students and have studied the history of research on leadership, they probably already know that there was a time when we had the great man theory of leadership, which is already gender problematic, but we looked at leadership in terms of qualities of a person. You know, is a leader tall, like Lyndon B. Johnson? Well, what about Napoleon, who was short? Well, is a leader loud, like George Patton? Well, but what about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, talk softly and carry a big stick? So these exceptions and contradictions led people to think maybe it's not the qualities of a person that determine leadership. Maybe it's the things a person does. Now that opened up a whole lot of opportunity because that you can teach, that you can learn.
Yeah.
And learning is the segue now to come back to intelligence versus learning. Intelligence is an innate quality. Learning is something we do. And the reason that I emphasize learning, including, I don't talk about students, I talk about learners. And I don't talk about teachers, I talk about lead learners. And administrators are stewards. Now that's in the school environment. In organizational life, especially in entrepreneurship, where people are fluid in their roles and doing different things together according to the needs, You can have lead learners and stewards all over the place. And you could be more than one on a given day, depending on the need. But I think recapturing a sense of agency and autonomy, being the captain of our own learning ship, knowing that we have valuable questions about the way things are and the way things work and the way things could be. After all, what is entrepreneurship other than identifying a need or an opportunity and putting something out into the world and taking responsibility for it and engaging with others to see what value might be created through it? That's
True.
learning to me.
Sounds good to me. Now, you coined the term open source learning. Can you explain the concept for everyone who's not familiar with that?
Sure. When it says founder of open source learning, I'm looking at my name tag here. That looks really impressive.
Mm-hmm.
These are only things that we've been doing for 10,000 years since we stopped hunting and gathering. What was interesting to me at the time was that even now in school and organizational life, you'll hear training, you'll hear instruction, teaching. And again, that's a one-to-many broadcast in which the many are sitting still quietly, looking at their own paper, raising their hands to go to the bathroom. And then we take them out of that environment. Even in organizations, you come out of a training and then you're supposed to be communicative and active. And why can't this person be a better team player or solve problems? So step one for me was shifting from being taught to actively learning. The open source part is more interesting because this was in the early 2000s. I gave my first talk about this. It was really interesting and telling, I think, because the first people, even though I came to this when I was teaching high school, the first people to really get excited about open source learning were not educators. They were futurists and the people who built Silicon Valley. So Howard Rheingold, who 30 years ago wrote the book Virtual Community and coined the term virtual community, wrote the foreword to my book. And my first talk on this stuff was at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto. And the Institute for the Future is well known and a spinoff of RAND. But, I think the difference between a teacher who has a theoretical framework and a research support system and a teacher who doesn't is the difference between getting fired and giving a TED Talk. So I gave a TED Talk. But the thing of it is, at the time that was happening, open source software was, Linus Torvalds, and I got to know a few folks, Brian Bellendorf, who wrote Apache, because I was welcomed into this tribe. Don Norman, the legendary designer for Apple and the author of The Design of Everyday Things. Tom Gruber, who wrote Siri. These were the rooms. I felt like the guppy in the whale tank. I had such an amazing respect for what these people had accomplished in their fields. I've always loved consulting because every single time I come into an organization, I get to learn new people and new business. And I've heard it said that every effective piece of software is effective and exercise in empathy. And that's true of consulting or learning with people as well. But these people especially was like, wow. But I didn't name it after open source software. It is true that in open source learning, if you like something I've done, and my blogs, from my courses 10, 15 years ago are still up on the internet where people can find them. And I'll be happy to share a few links with you for your notes. But what worked in California may be different in Berlin, and it may be different in Stuttgart or some cabin above the Arctic Circle. Well, great. And in that sense, the software logic works. Keep what works and refine what needs to be customized for you and your people and your circumstances. However, I was more of a nerd than that. I actually was thinking about thermodynamic systems.
Ooh.
And right, sexy, yeah. And the thing about thermodynamic systems is closed thermodynamic systems might exchange a little bit of light and heat with their environment, but they're static. They don't change. And that is antithetical to learning. So when I look at schools, and on a different day, we can even talk about architecture and design of learning spaces. When you think about these islands that are isolated in the middle of communities. They hide in plain sight, and they are built for mistrust. In America now, we've got cameras everywhere on top of it, but most of the post-war American school campuses look like mental institutions, and they're built with calming colors and right angles and tiles that are easy to clean, and they don't really feel warm and cuddly and designed for learning. But they're also impossible to get into. And now, of course, in America, because we're so afraid the next day the kid won't come home because there's going to be another shooting at school. And I don't know how to talk about that in a serious way, because I've talked about this so much that it breaks my heart every single time. So I don't want your audience to think that I'm being glib. This is absolutely crushing to me. And my own daughter is still in high school, so it boggles my mind. But school, nonetheless, is isolated from the rest of our culture. Semi-feral young people shouldn't be allowed into society, etc. But let's go back to that kid who wanted to fly. As a teacher in his 5th period class, I wasn't going to be the one to give him that opportunity or to impart that kind of information or guide his progress. So when we think about the role of the traditional teacher, sergeant at arms, content expert, we internalize that. And, you know, I should have mentioned this when you asked me about the remembered trauma, because we do have a very tricky dynamic that comes directly from our formal education and permeates not only the educational institution, but the way we approach business life and work and even family. And, you know, in schools, I talk about the idea that the inmates who won the zoo are the ones that run the zoo. If you got good at playing the school game, you're more likely to get a teaching credential or become an administrator. But we have this intergenerational Stockholm syndrome too, because as young students, we don't have the ability to push back or say no or set boundaries. So when I was in my 1st grade class, Mrs. Begley, another one of my arch villains. I had a lot of most of my teachers were really great. I'm talking about the 2 worst ones today for some reason. Most of them were amazing. But my 1st grade teacher pulled kids' hair for getting their math problems wrong. And I looked at my next door neighbor and I said, what is she doing? And I learned something in that moment. I learned that a whispered, aspirated S travels far across a quiet room and got me in trouble. And I was on my way to the principal's office before I knew it. But if someone else joined our conversation right now, our conversation would change. We would be aware of being observed. One of us might know that person. We would observe that person. One of us might be attracted to that person. We would definitely be talking about something new just to say hello, breaking the action. Lots of things would change. So when I think about the chemistry and structure of learning and how we need input from experts, support and critique from peers, and a whole lot of other things that we can go into in a different day about organizational dynamics and groups, it made every bit of sense to me to establish an open approach, to make that the new normal. There was nothing that I thought should be so private in a classroom or so confidential that it couldn't be shared in such a way as to create value and conversation and get feedback from people who knew more about certain elements than I did. If you want to become an auto mechanic, there's a garage right down the block. Why not get some guidance? And, you know, when all of this first started, I think one of the more interesting elements was the intergenerational aspect of it. You know, Skype is dead, RIP recently, but we started this on Skype, and we would have these amazing forums with experts in every field, including online and internet related culture and tools. And students had so much better experience as a result. So that's why I started thinking of this as open source learning. And then the name just stuck, and here we are.
I love it. Now, before we close, I wanted to ask you another personal question, which is, you compete in Ironmans while also writing books and running your business. So what does your personal operating system look like for balancing this extreme physical, intellectual, and emotional output? So in other words, what is your personal set of high performance habits to make all this possible?
If you would have asked me that in my 30s, I would have quoted Warren Zevon and said, I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Oh no, terrible.
Right. And I'm pointing that out because I'm a cautionary tale to every entrepreneur out there. I thought I was doing everything right. And what I learned, and this is why physical fitness became such an integral part of open source learning. Every learning experience is an endurance sport, basically. And to be at our best, we really need to fuel our energy. But what I didn't know back then was how important sleep and even non-sleep deep rest throughout the day. And again, I'm sure that in fact, I know that you've talked with experts on this, and I'm glad, because it's this whole late stage capitalism based on puritanical Protestant notions of work ethics thing is not the best model for a quality life.
Nope.
And I would rather make less money and have my health than, this actually taps into my doctoral research. I did a lot of work on the perceptions and uses of time in individual and organizational development. And that became a book that I actually put out. If I could figure out my color-coded shelves over here, I could find it. But in 1997, I wrote a book called Time for Success. And the model was based loosely on David Reisman's The Lonely Crowd. And what I suggested was that we essentially have an investment portfolio. We have 86,400 seconds a day. It's non-negotiable. It's ultimately democratic. The night watchman and the president both have the same 86,400 seconds. And at the end of every day, we lose them. So the question isn't how, this whole thing about time management drives me slightly insane for two reasons. First of all, you can't. And second of all, once you start focusing on managing you, instead of trying to manage this thing that is very poorly understood anyway, but is also not within our control, you come to realize that it's not really about management or efficiency. The comedian Stephen Wright had this great line about buying a microwave fireplace so he could sit in front of the fire for the evening in 6 minutes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I said it recently, if you're kissing someone and you want to hurry up and get to the next task, you're kissing the wrong person.
True.
So to fall in love with what we're doing is job number one, and to answer why we're doing what we're doing is really important. And then once you get to this realization that, yes, I have biological needs like sleep, nutrition, keeping my home, my nest clean, but then I have choices. And those choices fall into categories that I developed that were correlated to outer directed or market directed. So there were things that we do in time that we exchange for monetary compensation or prestige or, things that are objectively valued. And then there's other directed time that we invest because we're social animals and we need love and friendship and affection. So we invest in relationships. And then there's time that is inner directed that we use for our own personal development. And that can be gardening or spirituality or solving the ultimate math problem for 9 years in an attic, which has been done. And then there's also non-directed time that we use to recharge our batteries. And in large doses, that can become problematic if someone is living their life to distraction through sex or gambling or drugs or alcohol. But in small doses, it's necessary. And what's interesting about time and those kinds of decision-making models to me is that if you think about something like going to the gym, it's not about the thing itself. It's really a Rorschach in a way of us, because am I there because I'm a model or an actor or an athlete and I need to be in a certain shape because that's my job? Am I there because I love the people and this is the chance to see my friends? Am I there because I just want to get really good at the sport and this is my chance to practice that? Or is this my chance to not have to think about so many other things and just do something without having so much pressure on me? Now, to your question about the Ironman, I was about halfway through the pandemic, and we moved to be closer to my aging parents. And I was on Zoom, 9 hours a day. Those blue blocks on your calendar that you go like, oh my God, another one in 15 minutes. And my neighbor texted me, hey, listen, I've sat on the couch drinking long enough. I got to do something about the shape I'm in. Do you want to do something like super over the top? And I said, what do you have in mind? And he said, well, the Ironman is coming to La Quinta in Southern California. Do you want to do it? And I said, that sounds terrible. Absolutely. We should definitely do that. So he was going on vacation for a week, and he said, okay, get the gear, register us, figure out a training plan, and let me know when I get back. I'll jump in with you. He never did. That guy never showed up. But I wound up doing that one and then doing another one. And then I did the full Ironman in Cozumel this last November. And then I just did the Ironman in Oceanside. And I'm now looking at the calendar because I'm a little like, okay, what's next? What I love about living is that we used to think our learning window was for our youth. And what we've learned about neuroplasticity is that it's lifelong. Mm-hmm. And at any given moment, we can make a choice. It may not feel like we can, but objectively, looking from the outside in, if you're watching yourself as a character in a TV show or a movie, yeah, you can. I know the relationship might be really hard to get out of. I know the job might be really, really difficult to leave. I know that the skill might be really hard to learn. But that's why I do what I do. Because a lot of us, in fact, tell you what, this is going to be hard in a podcast, but I'll try it anyway because, hey, why not do this? If you put your arm out to your side as far as you can behind you.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to do that?
I do. You'll feel a tug in your shoulder and your bicep, and it'll tell you this far and no further, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I want you to look as far as you can over your shoulder and move your hand farther.
Yeah.
Okay, come back to me. That was farther than you thought the first time around, right?
Yep.
It turns out our visual cortex, if we can see, actually guides a lot of our motor function. And there are parts of our body and parts of our reality that don't work the way we thought. Like, for example, if you're having a really hot day and you put a cold towel in a place where you thought it would cool your thermostat down, it's actually telling your thermostat, oh, it's cooler now, heat back up.
Yep.
It's counterintuitive. And these are the things in small ways that get my attention. We'll try one more since I don't want to leave you just yet. I'm having too much fun now. If you take your hands and just stretch your fingers and wiggle your fingers, and put your hands together so that your fingers interlock.
Yep.
You've probably done this, but which one goes on top? For me, it's my right index finger.
Yep. Same.
Okay, great. Take your hands apart, wiggle them, stretch them out, make them forget everything they just did, and bring them together one more time. And this time, put your left index finger on top.
That feels so weird.
That's it in a nutshell, Claudia. The art of learning and teasing our brain into a different way of thinking about things is what entrepreneurs do best. And when it works, that brings me right back to where we started the conversation. That is why I truly have loved learning my whole life. And my hope is that as we continue, we're in a period of time that is undeniably difficult. And we have all of these competing interests for our attention, for our money, for the power over our lives even. And we're not going to get taught a better way to navigate this or to steward this planet for the next generation and the generation after that. We're going to have to learn it. And there are so many conversations we have yet to have about things like something as simple as community composting or something as complicated as cold fusion. All require us, we talk about the growth mindset or we talk about multiple intelligences, and these are valuable. This is all wonderful stuff to get us steps closer to the conversation. But in the end, it's doing that work with our anterior mid-cingulate cortex to take the cold plunge and to challenge ourselves into a level of uncomfort and training that we may not have thought possible. And that's where guides sometimes come in handy. But that's where the magic is. You know, there's only one story that every world culture holds in common. And Joseph Campbell gifted us this research, right? It's the monomyth, the hero's journey. And one of my favorite parts of that, this is actually a paraphrase. I'm a stickler about quotes, and most of the quotes on the internet are not accurate. But he came pretty close to this one. The treasure you seek lies in the cave of your worst fears. And so my hat's off to everybody in your audience who's doing the hard thing that hasn't been done and bringing something new into the world. And I hope that they're successful. And I know that to whatever extent that's true, it's going to be because you help them learn. So thanks for having me on today.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for those wonderful reminders. Now, where can the listeners find you online if they would like to connect or learn more from you?
They can find me on my website, which is one of the ugliest websites in the world right now, at davidpreston.net. They can find me on LinkedIn, David Preston Learning, or just use my name. And then I will also send you a link for anybody who wants to download more information, like the white paper on open source learning, so that you can make it available in your notes.
Perfect. Will do. Fantastic. David, thank you so much for sharing your tips and insights with us today. This was so much fun.
Thank you, Claudia.
So keep up the good work. Take care and talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, please take a sec to rate and review my show or share it with a friend. That way you can support the show and help me reach and support other entrepreneurs like yourself as well. If you would like my help to figure out how you can go from overwhelmed and overworked hustler to empowered and confident leader, check out my website at www.wiredforsuccess.solutions and book a free 20-minute strategy session with me. Can't wait to help you get wired for success. Until next time, take care. Bye.